so she asked him if she could come, and he told her no, because her hair was too long and her hair would get caught in the ropes. And so she turned around, went, chopped off her hair, came back and demanded to be taken, and she was. So then, at 15 years old, she was married off to the heir to the neighboring chieftain, Donald O'Flaherty. Donald O'Flaherty. Now, during the time that they were married, they had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. And while she was with Donald, she learned all she could about seafaring and piracy. Then, in 1560, after about 10 or 15 years of marriage, Donald was murdered, and he was murdered by the Joyce clan. Now, this clan assumed that Donald's land and castle would be easy pickings and up for the taking, because nobody would have assumed that his widow would take command of his men and protect the castle. But you guessed it right, that is exactly what Grainne O Mhaille did, and she was successful. So after protecting Donald's land and ships, she took whatever remaining force that was loyal to her husband and was then loyal to her father's lands, and declared those her stronghold. And starting with 3 galleys, she embarked on a career of piracy on the Irish seas, where she faced danger both on land and in sea. She was known as a fearless leader as well as a vengeful warrior who never forgave and always got revenge on those that wronged her. One of the most interesting, incredible stories that I came across was that one time after she had given birth, she gave birth on one of her ships, and just hours after, another pirate king decided to attack and board her vessel. And Grace, while carrying her newborn son and protecting him, she also had a sword in hand, and she led her men on a counterattack. And she again was successful, and not only did she defeat them, she also picked up the other ship. She conquered while carrying a baby and protecting baby. One arm, one sword, like just wow. Then in 1566, Grace got married to a man named Richard Iron Burke, and he was part of a very powerful family known as the McWilliams. It said that the queens and fleet pretty much had autonomy from English rule. They were pretty much left alone. After securing that, she went back to her life of piracy and ended up trying to plunder the Earl of Desmond in Munster. This was an unsuccessful plunder piracy, and she ended up getting caught. Now at this time, the Earl of Desmond was under suspicion of wanting to be a traitor to the English or rebel against the English, and so as I'm on your side, he decided to give Grace over to the English, and she ended up in prison in Dublin. Now, somehow, and nobody knows how she managed this, but she managed to get herself freed from this prison, and as soon as she got out, she went straight to work. She defeated the army that was sent to get her castles pretty much, and as well as the ships that were sent. And shortly after getting back from prison, the chief of the McWilliam family ended up dying, and so this sent Richard and Grace straight into rebellion in order to capture their succession to lead. So they gathered a huge army, an army including an elite force of Scottish mercenaries called the Gallow Glass, to come fight for them, and Grace was considered to be the real mastermind and power behind this power couple. Now, unfortunately, that only lasted for about 3 years until Richard died, but when Richard did die, Grace ended up taking his lands as part of her dowry, taking over Rockfleet, and declaring herself as chieftain. Now remember, at this time, women weren't allowed to be chieftains, and especially once the English ended up getting more involved, it was an even bigger no-no. And still, she persisted. So when Gaelic law clearly states that women can't be chieftains, Grace simply got rid of the social and political obstacles in her way and remained chieftain, and such was her influence and power that she was respected and regarded and accepted as matriarch of this area by neighboring clans, and as well as people that had been abandoned by their own chieftains that were supposed to protect them. So, like I said, the English were shocked by this and not okay with it, and so ultimately they murdered one of her sons. Now, I said before that Grace left no crime against her go unpunished, and obviously she was heartbroken about this, and so she rebelled. But unfortunately, on this attack, she was lured into a trap and captured. And this time, when she was captured, she was condemned to death. Unfortunately, she had a son-in-law that was bright enough to come to her aid, and he did. He was able to convince the people that were overseeing her prison sentence. So he managed to persuade them that his mother-in-law was really of no threat, and that he wasn't part of the rebellion himself, and so he could be trusted to have her, for them to hand her over to him, and they wouldn't be heard from. They'd leave them alone. Now, of course, this was a lie, and as soon as she was freed, both him and her went straight back into rebellion. So then in 1588, when the English were in conflict with Spain and the Spanish Armada, some were worried that the Spaniards would find supporters and empathizers amongst the Irish and look for support from them. And so skirmishes between English Birmingham, specifically the man that was in charge of this Birmingham, and was left with such an impression of her that when a new map of Ireland was being drawn